Hi there, welcome to a reading vlog. My goal for 2026 is to get through as many of my TBRs on my bookshelf before I pick up a book from the library or from a bookstore to add to my ever-growing number of books on all of my shelves in my home. So today we are picking up a novel called The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. This is by James McBride. I know absolutely nothing about this author and absolutely nothing about this book. So this will be interesting. Apparently, James McBride has authored several best-selling Oprah's Book Club picks, including Deacon King Kong. He's also written The Good Lord Bird, which is a novel about small town secrets and the people who keep them. I know none of these titles, so I'm very interested to read this book. Apparently this is an author people know. I have never heard of them. This book specifically says it is set in 1972 in small town Pennsylvania. Some workers are digging the foundations for a new housing development. The last thing they expect to uncover was a human skeleton. Who the skeleton was and how it got buried there were just two of the long-held secrets that had been kept for decades by the residents of Chicken Hill, the dilapidated neighborhood where immigrant Jews and African Americans live side by side, sharing ambitions and sorrows. Chicken Hill is where Moshe, oh my goodness, I'm gonna butcher these names. I'm gonna have to learn how to say them. Moshe and Chona Ludlow. I'll look up how to say their names later. But anyway, I'm assuming these are our two main characters. One of them runs this Heaven and Earth grocery store. Oh, they both run the Heaven and Earth grocery store, husband and wife. And we have something with a deaf black child who lives in the town, and the state wants him to be institutionalized, but Chicken Hill's residents band together to keep the boy safe. Okay, anyway, there is a very long synopsis, but I think this book will be fairly interesting to read, and so we'll just get into it, and I will keep you updated as I go along. I'm going to not try to give a ton of spoilers and just give you my impression of the book as I'm going through, what I'm liking about it, what I'm not liking about it, tone, style, characterization, those kinds of things. But I'm going to sit here in front of the fire, maybe grab myself some tea, and tuck into The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. Okay, I'm back, and forgive my nighttime state. It's been a long day of work. It's been a couple days since I started reading The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, and I just got to a point where I wanted to turn on my camera and chit-chat through it because I'm really enjoying this book. It is not what I was expecting. Not that I had a really good idea of what the book was about, but it is very fascinating. I am extremely invested in these characters, and there are a couple chapters where I wanted to claw my eyes out. I was so infuriated by what certain people were doing. It was just like, And I think this book is going to make me cry at the end. I'm really concerned it's going to have a very sad ending. And I should have known based off the setup that, like, it's going to be sad. Because the prologue of the book takes place years after the story. And there's like one scene where you meet a character who is now an old man, and there's an exchange that happens, and then the very next day, this whole town is just wiped out in a hurricane. And I'm just like, the first time I read it, you have no context. There's a bunch of names that you're just like, this means nothing to me. And now I'm like, I just started part 2, so it's like chapter 12 or something of the book, and I'm just like already so sad. I'm just preparing myself to be sad. Anyway, that was not the point of this. let me give some context. And I don't want this to be a spoiler because I do actually encourage you to go and read this book. I'm actually very interested to pick up some of the other novels that James McBride has written because I love his writing style. And I want to read a few of the excerpts that they shocked me. I had to sit, in a good way, they shocked me. I just had to sit there and I would never have thought of describing something that way, but you can just picture it perfectly because of the way that he describes certain characters or certain actions in here. So I really recommend reading this book. It is set in a small town in Pennsylvania, and I actually did look up that this town does exist. It's called Pottstown, Pennsylvania. This story takes place in 1920s, 1930s. That is the age of the Great Depression in the United States, but that's not necessarily what's happening in this book. This book is actually focused on immigration in the US and kind of social and cultural and racial struggles that rise up when you have this small farm community that is very heavily white, when all of a sudden it is invaded by all of these other peoples and cultures and religions and ways of living and being in the world. Also with the rise of industrialism and factories and how that misplaces or displaces, I should say, the farming community in this small town. And so we have our characters who are Jewish, and they're a mix of Greeks and Lithuanians and Romanians and Hungarians and Germans and people who have come from a diverse background, who have come from situations where they were facing poverty, they were facing discrimination, they were running for their lives in many situations and saw America as this place of freedom and a fresh start, and a place where they could raise their families and they could believe in their religion without any sort of restrictions placed on them by a government. And mixed in with our Jewish community, we have African Americans who have moved up into the northern parts of America, who have come here from the South, from a South that is still very much under Jim Crow laws and segregation, despite the fact that slavery has been abolished since 1865. But it's been, 50 years since African Americans have been freed from slavery, and they are still living in this world in which they are looked down upon, in which they do not have other opportunities that their white brethren have, or their immigrant brethren have. And so they are very much living in this world of trying to carve out a place for themselves, while at the same time being forced to be background characters and to be quiet and to play this submissive role and to essentially move through life as shadows so that they don't end up in really dangerous, harmful situations where, they're accused of things that they have no recourse for because they can't get justice, right? And so they'll get thrown in jail, or they'll get, I don't know what's appropriate to say on YouTube, but unalived, I guess, by other people in the community. It sounds like it's a terrible way to say it, but I feel like I can't say any of the actual words that you all probably know that I'm going for here. Anyway, so we have our Jewish community mixed in with our African American community, and then we have our white community, which is mostly made up of people who have lived for generations in this town in Philadelphia. They pride themselves on having ancestors who came over on the Mayflower, right? These are people whose roots run very deep and whose prejudices potentially run even deeper than that. So it's a fascinating, fascinating setting. The characters are absolutely amazing. I did learn how to say our main couple's names. They are a Jewish couple named Moshe and Chona. We follow multiple characters POV throughout the book, but they are kind of our primary figures who start this story and who are really the linchpin of a lot of these diverse cultures in this town of Pottstown. They kind of bring together the community in such a way that, like, you know, Moshe owns this dance hall, and he has learned to make it a space for everyone in the community. And so he brings in bands that serve the white Presbyterian crowds, and then he'll bring in black jazz bands so that African Americans can come with their families and dance the night away. And he'll bring in Yiddish bands so that all of his Jewish friends can come and sing their hymns and do their celebrations for their rituals and for their religion. And so he has built this business where he has brought people not necessarily together because they are still individual events, but he has found a way to give everyone an opportunity to have equality in their experiences. And his wife, even more so, like, I love Chona. I want to be her when I grow up. But she's a very, very fierce Jewish woman. She loves her community very deeply. She loves her home. She loves her grocery store. She wants the absolute best for these people. She reads all the time. She writes all the time. And she wants nothing more than justice for everyone and for equality for everyone, and to break down all of these human fabricated barriers between people. You know, the differences that we think exist that don't actually exist, right? She wants us to see the humanity in everyone, and that is, like, to her core, the thing that she wants most in life is, and especially as a Jewish woman, she, like, sees her religion as not just like a moral code to live by, or like a set of rites and rituals and cultural norms that she has to follow, but like, she deeply believes in the stories and the intent of the religion of, like, the Jewish faith being one of love and community and respect for others. And so even within the context of her Jewish community, she's also striving to break down barriers, like, between how women and men are viewed in the religion, and what sort of respect and importance that women are allocated and what roles they're allowed to have. Now, there are a few other characters that I want to introduce you all to, but I actually want to do that by reading some of the excerpts from the book, because I just loved how the author wrote these characters and gave you insight into who they are in a person in, like, very short sections of the book, but, like, immediately it was like, yes, I know exactly who this person is. I've met people like this in my life. So we're going to start with Nate, who is one of our African American characters. This is a part of the book where he's coming home, and so there's, like, a group of other people, of his friends, who are sitting in his home, and his wife has just brought him inside. And his friends have been sitting there, they've been playing a card game and kind of just shooting the breeze. When Nate enters the room, there's a friend there who they call Snooks, who is the reverend of the African American community here. But then we get this description. On the hill, it was Nate Himbelin's opinion that counted. Nate smiled at Snooks. You still reading out the book of Revelation, Snooks? Snooks nodded. I am. Tell me when then. Snooks shifted uncomfortably. Like most colored on the hill, Snooks was a little afraid of Nate. There was a silent pool in Nate Himblin, a stirring that did not invite foolishness, a quiet that covered a kind of tempest. Like most on the hill, Nate claimed the South as his home, but unlike his fellow hill residents, he never spoke of his past. That was a dark hole. He was a light turned off. But to the colored of the hill, a light switched off did not mean it could not be switched back on. Anything could happen in this world, especially on the hill, with the occasional piece of chickens and goats squawking and bleating happily, could disintegrate into a wild scramble of booze, bullets, spilled guts, and chaos. Nate was easygoing, quiet, deft, slow-moving, with a wide smile and hands that gripped hammers tightly and eyes that gazed at you dead on. But he was, even at 60, what the old folks called much of a man. I just thought that was like a really good description of a character where, I don't know, I loved him right away. But the other character that I wanted to talk about was in a chapter that I was so mad. I was so mad. Okay, this is one of our white characters, and this book was written in for some reason I thought this book was like much older, but it says copyright 2023, so it makes sense why when I read this chapter I was like, oh my gosh, this 100% describes modern day America. Clearly the author, was like, things haven't changed much in 100 years in some respects. So this is about Doc Roberts, who comes from a family who has lived in Pottstown for generations and owned a lot of land there and been like a centerpiece of the community. They have seen the town evolve over their many generations, and not everybody is particularly happy with that evolution. Doc Roberts himself is a member of the KKK and definitely has some very, very bad opinions, bad beliefs, and doesn't treat people very nicely, despite the fact that he is a doctor and, his job really should be treating the sick regardless of skin color. But I wanted to read his description from this chapter. Okay. So this description is about Doc Roberts and his cousin, who grew up across the creek from him, is where his family lived for generations. Neither Doc nor Carl had interest in questioning their family lineage, for their childhoods were as full of as much happiness as any descendant of the Mayflower might enjoy. They were white Christian men, born in an America seemingly ready-made for them. The two families, now splintered off and bearing different last names, were happily ensconced on neighboring farms at Pine Forge on wonderful acreage bordering Manatawny Creek, full of sunflowers and pastures and rich soil. The two families lived across the creek from one another. Doc's family, the Robertses, on one side. Carl's family, the Boydkinsons, on the other. The two families often traveled to church together on Sundays by carriage. Presbyterian, of course. The civilized services filled the sanctuary to the brim with good white people. Those were wonderful days, Doc's childhood, full of strong men whose handshake was their bond, and women who knew how to cook and raise children. Nice, clean families. This was before the new people, the Jews, the word I don't think I'm allowed to say, the Greeks, the Mennonites, the Russian Orthodox arrived. So, if that tells you anything about that character, he has some pretty nasty opinions about his neighbors who live on the hill. And then I wanted to also read this next description of him. Right, so that's how Doc Roberts views himself and his place in the community. And then we get a slightly different version of how other people think of him. To the white folks of Pottstown, Doc Roberts was the kind of man whose bespectacled countenance belonged on breakfast cereal boxes. The kind, gentle country doc. Friend to all, deliverer of babies, a wonderful man, a Presbyterian. But for the black folks of the hill, Doc was a running joke. Why go see Doc Roberts and pay to die? He was a special fright for black children of the hill, center of 1,000 nightmares shepherded by the exhausted mothers who needed sleep. Mothers whose children tumbled about restlessly past their bedtimes would burst into darkened bedrooms and warn, if you don't shut your eyes right now, I'm taking you to Doc Roberts, which cut off the giggles and cackling immediately. youngsters who refused to swallow that awful tasting cod liver oil and ghastly country remedies used to cure colds, fevers, and unknown maladies were met with, "Suck this medicine down right now or I'll fetch Doc Roberts. Old Doc will give it to you in jail." And down the hatch the awful concoction would go. I just thought that paragraph was like a really nice comparison of people who look at someone and because he looks like them, they think that they have a shared experience and they have shared values, and therefore they must be good, right? Like, color of the skin means that you are a moral and upstanding citizen, versus this other side of the community who sees below that skin color and acknowledges that he's not a good person, right? Like, he's not a good doctor, right? Like, he doesn't help them. They're left on their own in this town where he is the only doctor. They're left to fend for themselves because he doesn't see them as people. He still sees them as animals who deserve nothing more but to live in the shadows and to live in, you know, muddy huts on the side of town. So yeah, that is where I have rambled enough, and so I will stop for now. Like I said, I have just started part 2 of the book, which is where Dodo, who is this 12-year-old African-American boy who is now an orphan, and Chona and Moshe were trying to help Nate hide him from the state because they were trying to put him in an insane asylum, essentially. Ends up that he is caught and he is taken to this, what do they call it? Penhurst is the name of this institution, and so he is now there. And I've read 1 chapter of that section and feel like this is going to tug on my heartstrings. So I'm going to keep reading, and I will check in probably at around the stopping point of part 2 and let you know how it's going. I have finished the Heaven and Earth grocery store. It's actually been a couple weeks since I finished the book. I ended up going on a trip for work and then came home sick. And so I was out for a week, and then I got my partner sick, and so I've been taking care of him for the last week. So it's just been a hot minute since I've actually had time to sit down and finish the recording of my book review. The benefit is I haven't forgotten anything, for the most part, that happened in this book over that 2 weeks, which I think speaks to the impact of this story. So from the start, I will say I'll probably give this book like a 4.5 star rating. I would definitely recommend it. I actually want to go and read some other of James McBride's books because I just absolutely fell in love with his writing style. I think he has very compelling characters. I think the way that he writes the story is just very engrossing. This book specifically walked through, it was all third person, but you got to look from a lot of characters, different perspectives. And even if it was just 1 chapter or even just half of a chapter from one character's perspective, you still immediately felt like you knew that person. You could relate to their motivations and their thought processes and what they were just going through in that moment of time. And it was just a very interesting way of, to me, of reinforcing some of the themes of the book. I think I mentioned this in the last part I recorded, right? We're talking about pre-civil rights America, with the influx of immigrants, with African Americans trying to like find their place in the larger American society. The fact that this book moved us through different characters from a wide set of backgrounds helped you as the reader understand the diversity of thought and the diversity of experience and the diversity of desires from people, and like what people were searching for in life and how they were moving through life, how they viewed themselves as part of the larger society and how they viewed their place in the world, which was just a very subtle way, I thought, to actually explore the theme of what it was like to be an immigrant and to be in African America in 1900s, right? America, where you have all of these cultures and races and ethnicities all trying to like blend together. But what does that actually mean? Because people are trying to hold on to traditions and to beliefs from their culture while also trying to find a place in America, but also not totally understanding what does it mean to be an American. Is an American identity something that you can actually define, that everyone would agree upon that definition? After reading it, I actually watched an interview with the author. He read some of the book. He talked a bit about how it came to him, and it's not based on any historical events. In fact, he tells the story that it wasn't even meant to be set in Pottstown, PA, despite the fact that is a real town. And some of the places in the story are real, like Pennhurst, which is the mental institution, was a real place. But the story itself isn't based on real people and wasn't necessarily meant to be placed within that part of the country. It's not really even about that part of the country. It's more based off of experiences from his mother and from his grandmother, who were Jewish immigrants, and kind of what he learned from their experiences, and wanting to tell that story in a way that felt very natural and very grounded in a point in time of American history and a distinguishable part of the country, right? To really give it character and flavor and a tangibility that you probably couldn't get if he said it in a made-up town somewhere in the US. But he talked a lot about the theme of the book being this struggle for justice and this struggle for equality, and how that plays out, and what it's like for someone to seek justice but not get that in their lifetime, like how that makes them feel versus someone who actually can get justice for a person who wronged them in their lifetime, and how people move through society who are consistently looked down upon, who aren't seen as equals, and how that kind of shapes you as a person in the way that you move through the world and the way that you make decisions. And the big question that he talks about the book posing is all about what do we keep from the old and what do we leave behind, particularly relevant to, I think, immigrant populations in the story of people who are coming from all across Europe. Specifically in the story, it's all across Europe, and it's specifically Jews. But even then, right, everybody kind of comes with their own Jewish traditions across Eastern Europe and Western Europe. They all have these different influences, these different ways of practicing their religion, their different ways of practicing homemaking, and their different kind of variations of Jewish holidays. And so there's an ongoing conversation throughout the book of how do all of these diverse Jewish individuals kind of find their identity as Jews together, and like bond over a common faith, while also trying to balance their own unique traditions with building new traditions as Americans. How do you respect where you came from while also kind of recreating your life and recreating what identity you want for yourself? I don't know if I explained any of that really well. That's kind of the gist of the book, right? Or one of the primary themes of the book. As I was reading, I took a bunch of notes on different things that I liked about the book, and noted down a ton of pages where there was like a description of a character that I really loved, or just a situation that I think was written super well. So I might read through some of those for you all to get a flavor of why I love the writing style so much. And then I will wrap up with my overall thoughts on the book and just a few things of what I disliked. I want to start with kind of our main couple of the story. These are Chona and Moshe, who is our Jewish couple. Chona was born in America, and Moshe migrated from Romania. They are, I think, kind of our protagonists of this book, kind of. But we kind of drop off their perspectives by part 3 of the book. But we do learn a lot about the two of them and how they grow over the story. There's not as much character development for some of the others, I would say. And even Chona is like very consistent, and really in the story, she is the moral center to the story, and so she doesn't really change a ton as a person. She's really like the linchpin of the community, and she is the one who brings so many of these different cultures and races in the community together, right? Like, she sees people as people, and so she has African American friends, she has Italian friends, she has white friends, though not as much because of where they live. That is really Chona's core of her personality, is that she truly believes in equality. She truly believes in people just being people and not being defined by the color of their skin or by the country they came from or by their economic background or their educational background, and so on and so forth. Moshe is perhaps the character who we see develop most throughout the story, and a lot of that is because of Chona's influence on him, and then by proxy the other people that Chona brings into his life. It is interesting because he's someone who kind of appears to maybe not see color, to not see skin color as much as some of the others in his community. But you kind of learn that it's not that he doesn't see skin color so much as he sees people as means to an end. And so to grow his business, when he does things like bringing in African American bands and bringing in a Black audience, he's not necessarily doing that to break down social barriers or because he believes in civil rights. He's doing it because he sees the monetary value in it. Same with like how he caters to the various audiences in the town, right? He'll bring in white bands, he'll bring in Jewish bands, he'll bring in Black bands. And he's not necessarily doing it to build a diverse community. He's doing it because he can diversify his profits, right? He can diversify his income stream. We see a few different times throughout the book, like Moshe's unwillingness to actually engage with people as people. He has a Black couple who the man has been working with him for decades. And at one point he realizes that he's never touched them, like he's never shaken hands with this man who has been his constant companion for decades. There's a point where he's going through some pretty intense grief, and Addie and Nate, who are the Black couple, are with him, helping him, but there is no physical form of comfort. Like Moshe keeps that physical distance because like intellectually he wants to believe that he doesn't see them as different, but he actually does. Like that's kind of an ingrained habit within him that he does see them as different, not necessarily inferior, but definitely distinct from himself. And there's that like level of discomfort of, you are different than me, and so I can't, there's like a level of vulnerability I won't express to you, which is interesting. With that, let me read some of these descriptions that I thought were super interesting. I think I already read the description of Nate and Doc Roberts on the last time I recorded, so I'm gonna read a couple of this character that is nicknamed Monkey Pants. We only ever see him through Dodo's perspective, so Dodo gives him this nickname of Monkey Pants because they can't actually verbally communicate with each other, and so he never actually learns this boy's name. But there's a couple of descriptions of him that I like both wanted to laugh and cry at. The way he wrote was imagery that I would never have come up with on my own, but as I was reading, I was like, I know exactly the image that you're trying to convey with that. So let me go to where we first meet this character. For Monkey Pants, whose condition in 30 years would fall into the yawning labyrinth of spinning medical terminology known as cerebral palsy, a clumsy, useless term, nearly as useless as the idea of confining a child with his physical challenges to an insane asylum where he was normally sedated every morning, had somehow been forgotten by the nurse who dosed out the daily knockout drops that day. As Dodo stared into the eyes of Monkey Pants, he could see, clear as day, that there was a boy in there. And then this is the description that made me laugh. Because Dodo and Monkey Pants are trying to communicate with each other through physical gestures, which is pretty hard for Monkey Pants as someone with cerebral palsy and doesn't have a lot of control over his limbs. For the first 4 hours, Monkey Pants gave Dodo a spellbinding, extraordinary performance lecture on the art of survival in one of the oldest and worst mental institutions in the history of the United States. But this did not come easily. Watching Monkey Pants give a lecture was like watching an octopus trying to shake hands with a flamethrower. Nothing worked right. The boy fought to communicate. His chest constricted, his lips contorted. His limbs flapped around wildly in spasmic bursts. They seemed to have their own mind about which direction they wanted to go in. He worked like a madman, his limbs flailing, mouth moving in unintelligible bursts, then stopping as he exhausted himself, only to continue after catching his breath, only to exhaust himself again. And then we have another brief moment with an Italian mother character, and I thought some of her descriptions were pretty interesting. I thought this sentence specifically was like just an interesting description. So Fioria is our Italian mother. She's talking to another Italian woman named Pia. They're having one of those read between the line conversations. And at this point, we have a kind of a break in the conversation. And it goes, Fioria reached across the table and gently placed her hand on Pia's shoulder. This assured Pia, for a good woman's heart can hold secrets better than any vault. And Fioria was a good woman. And I thought that was just like a really compelling sentence of like the bond between women and like the depth of trust that these people have in each other. And I just like that description of like a good woman's heart can hold secrets better than any vault. And Fioria was a good woman. We get another description of her a little later on. Fioria peered around at the young men standing about. She had known most of them since childhood, some for more than a decade. Some of them had been in her living room doing odd jobs, others had eaten her pasta. For after she served her husband and son, if she saw a hungry child pass by, she couldn't help herself. There was something about a starving child that pulled every string in Fioria Carissimi, who grew up in a small Sicilian village near Palermo, where a dinner of rice with olive oil and real meat was something that happened once a year at Christmas. She just couldn't stand it. Page 200. There was another description that I wanted to read. Okay, so this is another description about Nate. It's really short, but Nate has a bit of a background. We don't know a lot about it. We learn more as the book goes on, but he's very quiet and very secretive about his past. And so as he and Addie are talking about him going to visit Dodo in the mental asylum, Nate is very resistant because of his past. And so they have this conversation. And Addie's challenging him about, like, why have you not gone to see Dodo? And Nate responds with, I don't know that they'll let me in there, he said. They'll let a knock-kneed cow in there. It's a nut house, not a prison. They ain't gonna make you into a bellhop. They got visiting times. I'm shy about going to them kind of places, Nate said. Addie frowned. So that was it. A man with a history who wouldn't share doesn't want to go into a locked place. Not even for a visit. Not if he's been in a locked place before himself. I have a few other descriptions, but I'll save a few of them. I won't read too much, but I did want to give one description of Chona, because I don't think I've read about her yet. Chona had never been one to play by the rules of American society. She did not experience the world as most people did. To her, the world was not a china closet where you admire this and don't touch that. Rather, she saw it as a place where every act of living was a chance for tikkun olam, to improve the world. The tiny woman with the bad foot was all soul. Big. Moshe was a foot taller, yet she was the big one. Yeah, that's all the descriptions I read for now. I don't want to spoil it, but hopefully that gives you a taste of the writing style of the book and piques your interest into reading it, because I would highly recommend it. In conclusion, my overall summary of the book is fantastic, definitely worth the read. Some of the things that I really appreciated most, like I've said a few times already, is I loved the writing style. I thought the characters were all very complete. They felt very complex, even if you only spent a single chapter with them. And it was a super interesting storyline. There was a lot of different individual stories kind of tied into this overarching narrative, and I thought it was very well done how all of those threads were tied together. There are a few things that I disliked. There's a couple times in the book where the author goes on to a diatribe, which breaks you away from the story, and is also, both of the times I had a moment of, I already knew what the author was getting at within the context of the story, and so then when he became really explicit in these rants, I was like, okay bro, I get it. You didn't have to write this out explicitly. You know, that moment you have where it's like, I know what the author's saying, like you already communicated it to me through the story. You don't have to then proceed to break the fourth wall and preach at me, if that makes sense. And he does that with a bit on gun rights, and then he does it closer to the end of the book about capitalism. When I learned the book was written in 2023, it was like, oh, I get it, like you are talking about the state of America and some of the issues with politics that we're having right now, and some of these things where it's like we have thousands of children die a year from school shootings and no one seems to want to do anything about gun rights. And we live in a world in which people can't afford to meet their basic needs because capitalism sucks. And so in the time and place, like, I get why the author felt the need to dig into these issues and to like be super clear on how he feels about them, but at the same time, like, the story was communicating that really clearly in a more compelling way because it wasn't super explicit. These problems haven't gone away, and I think that was the most compelling thing for me is, you know, we're talking about 1940s, 30s, which at this point is almost 100 years ago in American history. And I think that's a compelling of like the issues that people were dealing with then, we're still facing. Like, we've had all of this progress and all of these technological advances, but we still haven't broken away from racism and from, you know, institutions that introduce these systemic problems and these false divides between people. False in the sense of like, they don't have to be there, but because we have these systems at play, they are very real divides between people. All real compelling things. I just didn't necessarily like how they were so explicit in the story. And then the other thing that I didn't appreciate as much, I get kind of probably why the author included this, to wrap up the different threads of the story. But the book itself kind of ends on a cliffhanger, and then we get a like 3-page epilogue. And after reading the epilogue, I actually kind of wished I hadn't. I think the story would have been much better ending on the cliffhanger it did, and not telling us that all these people had a happy ending. Because I think to me, that kind of defeated the theme of getting justice and what it means to get justice that the book has been exploring this whole time, by then being like, oh, all of these hardships these people went through, like, it was worth it because they all moved on with their lives and they all had a happy ending at the end of the day, whatever that meant for each character. To me, that kind of felt flat. Like, I kind of honestly wanted more of a tragedy, because I think that is more realistic to life, which is, yeah, we do want everybody to get justice, and we do want equality to be a real thing, but most often they're not, right? And so many people throughout history have gone to their deathbed not ever being able to have justice for the wrongs that have been done to them, or to see the things that they have fought so hard for within their own lifetime, right? Like, there's always this hope, I think, as humans that we have of, even if I don't experience, I want to fight for it because I want my kids to have that, or I want my kids' kids to have that. I think that leaving the story on that note of like, we have all these characters who fought so hard, but we don't quite know as a reader of like, did they make it happen? And I think leaving the reader with that feeling would have cemented a lot of the themes better than wrapping up with this epilogue where everyone gets a happy ending. But that's also just me and my personal taste. I don't think the epilogue necessarily harms the story. I would still give the book an overall 4.5 stars. So definitely worth the read. I'd read it again. I've said this ad nauseum, but I would recommend it to you. I just think maybe next time I read it, I'm not going to read the epilogue. That is all I have to say at the moment. I could keep going and rambling, but I'm sure this video is long enough. And I would rather you all go and pick up a copy from your library or your local bookstore of The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. Give it a read and leave me a comment letting me know what you think of it. So thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll be back for more.